Hello again. Between 1936 and 1939, a fierce civil war was fought in Spain between the Republicans and the Nationalists, who were led by General Franco. Roughly speaking, the Republicans were left wing and the Nationalists on the right. Nazi Germany was sympathetic in an ideological sense with Franco and his Nationalists and offered him help in fighting the Republicans. There was another motive, though, behind the aid which the Germans provided, and this was that they had developed various aircraft and also military tactics which they wished to see tested on the battlefield. Germany knew that before long they were bound to launch a war themselves in Europe, and the Spanish Civil War gave them a splendid opportunity to see how their new ideas on warfare, as well as individual weapons such as the Stuka dive bomber, might work in practice. In 1937, Guderian's book Achtung Panzer was published, which set out his theory of mechanized warfare, uh, which later became known as Blitzkrieg, of course. And that same year, the Germans were able to field test the emerging theory of using rapid attacks by air, which came later to be known also as Blitzkrieg, lightning war. They tested out these ideas on the Spanish city of Guernica with horrifying results, which were very satisfactory from their point of view. They laid the ground for the opening stages of the Second World War and the conquest of Europe. The activities that they took part in Spain showed that using dive bombers like the Stuka, which can be seen in the thumbnail to this video, and also the idea of mechanized warfare, were very practical. What does all this have to do with Ukraine, you are wondering? We are today behaving in precisely the same way there. Of course, we in the West do have a vague ideological sympathy for Ukraine, if for no other reason that they are fighting our historic enemy, Russia. There is a deeper motive, though, as to why we are sending them missiles and tanks, fighter planes, and anti missile systems. It is widely suspected that in coming years we may find ourselves facing a war with China, although we don't like to talk about this openly. We know that China is developing weapons such as hypersonic missiles, which can travel between 5 and 25 times as fast as the speed of sound. We have very little idea of how our existing military hardware would be able to cope with such things. Are we in danger of being outclassed on the battlefield by China? That would be an alarming thought, and it could leave us helpless if China launched a war of aggression in Southeast Asia, for example. How would American forces in South Korea cope with an assault by hypersonic missiles? Could the Patriot anti-missile system cope with such an attack? By happy good fortune, the Americans have now been able to field test their Patriot missile batteries against an attack by hypersonic missiles in real-life combat. This happened in Kiev over the last day or two. This is fantastically good news for the United States because the data from these exchanges will prove absolutely invaluable. In just the same way, our own missiles and tanks are also being tested in combat, and we are able to see how they really hold up in battle. It's one thing to drive over Salisbury Plain during an exercise, but really to see how these things work, nothing beats a nice little war, preferably one a long way from Britain. I do not say that European countries and America are being altogether cynical in this matter, any more than the Germans were when they offered aid to Franco during the Spanish Civil War. Of course, we support Ukraine and hope they will win against the Russians. But the chief reason for shipping sophisticated modern ordnance to the Russian border has far more to do with testing our own capabilities than it does with defending Ukraine. What is happening now will provide us with the information which will allow us to see how our weaponry really matches up against modern threats like hypersonic missiles. I'm sure that the Americans were cheering in private when Russia launched hypersonic missiles and the Patriot anti-missile system was given the chance of seeing how effective it was against them. Make no mistake, a game is being played out here on the geopolitical stage which has little to do with our supporting plucky little Ukraine against the Ivans. Our support for Ukraine is at least 90% self-interest, and if it wasn't, then we wouldn't be offering a fraction of the support which we are. The reason we're so heavily involved in shipping weapons to Ukraine is not simply because it's a country facing unjust aggression from a neighbour. That's happening all over the world. We don't generally care about it. In this case, though, the aggressor has all kinds of interesting new weapons for us to look at, and that makes this war simply irresistible.